Alan Watts once said something unsettling about spiritual awakening: most people never reach the final stage. Not because it's difficult, but because they use spirituality to strengthen exactly what needs to be dissolved. The ego doesn't die when you meditate for years. It simply learns how to dress up as something enlightened. And that's where the real problem begins. The death of the ego is not what it seems. It's not an achievement. It's not a spiritual trophy you collect. It's the moment you realize there was never a separate you that needed to become enlightened. Consciousness was already complete. You were just too busy pretending to be a seeker. And here's the irony: the more you search for awakening, the more you reinforce the self-illusion that there is someone there who needs to awaken. Watts called this the final trap. And that's exactly why so few make it through. Alan Watts was not just another philosopher talking about East and West. He was a translator of experiences. He took Zen Buddhism and Taoism and turned them into a language that ordinary people could actually feel, not just understand intellectually. Born in 1915, he spent his entire life dismantling the illusion of the ego that the West had so carefully constructed. And he did it in a way that was so simple it was almost unsettling. Because simplicity hurts when you are used to complexity. What made Watts special wasn't just his knowledge. It was his ability to show that consciousness is not something you achieve. It is something you already are. He spoke about the nature of the self as if he were pointing out a joke that everyone takes far too seriously. And that was the essence of Alan Watts' awakening. He wasn't trying to make you better. He was trying to show you that the desire to become better was just the ego disguising itself as spirituality. Most people imagine spiritual awakening as some kind of glorious finish line. A permanent state of bliss. Maybe a feeling of power, total control over the mind. But the final stage of awakening that Watts talked about has nothing to do with that. It's not about gaining something new. It's about losing the deepest belief you carry, the belief that there is a fixed, separate you inside the body, watching the world from the inside. This is the point very few people reach. Because when you're seeking awakening, who is doing the seeking? The ego. And the ego wants to be special. It wants to be enlightened. It wants to tell others that it arrived. So it turns the spiritual journey into another competition. Another self-improvement project. Awareness takes a back seat while the me tries to become a better version of itself. And in the end, non-duality becomes just another idea the ego collects. The ego is not your enemy. It's simply a pattern of thoughts that you've mistaken for who you are. Alan Watts said this in countless ways. The sense of I and mine isn't a real entity living inside your body. It's a practical strategy of the mind, a temporary point of view within a much larger field of awareness. The problem begins when you believe that this point of view is all that you are. The illusion of the ego is so convincing that even when you read about it, you have to ask, who is actually reading? The ego itself, of course. It takes in the information and thinks, great, now I understand the ego, that makes me more conscious. And just like that, the trap is set again. Self-deception doesn't disappear through intellectual knowledge. It simply changes its disguise. That's why Watts insisted that spiritual awakening isn't about understanding the ego. It's about seeing through it, seeing that it was never solid, never permanent, and never who you truly are. Here is a natural, clear, everyday English translation, keeping the meaning, flow, and tone intact without sounding robotic. Here is the cruel paradox. Spiritually driven people often use spirituality to feed the ego. Not on purpose, but because it happens automatically. Someone meditates for years and starts thinking, I've made so much progress. Another person reads about non-duality and feels, I'm more awake than ordinary people. These reactions seem harmless. But they are simply the ego dressed as a monk. The death of the ego is frightening because it leaves no one special. There is no trophy. No badge of enlightenment. No higher self standing above others. And that is exactly what most people unconsciously avoid. They want transcendence, but they want the self to stay in charge of it. They want to dissolve the ego, but they also want to be seen as the ones who dissolved it. Awareness waits patiently while the ego keeps playing this endless game with itself. When someone finally crosses that threshold, there are no fireworks. No feeling of epic victory. What happens feels much more like a deep relief. A release. Life keeps being life, but without the constant weight of filtering everything through, how does this affect me? Awareness is no longer held hostage by the story of the self. What remains is simply seeing things as they are, without adding layers of self-centered interpretation. This doesn't mean permanent happiness. It doesn't mean the absence of emotions. Alan Watts never promised a constant state of bliss. What he pointed to was acceptance, the ability to be with reality without resisting it, without needing it to be different, without requiring it to confirm who you think you are. It's ordinary. So ordinary that it often disappoints those who expected something grand. And maybe that's exactly why so few recognize it when it happens, because they were searching for something extraordinary, while the real thing was always hidden in the ordinary. Alan Watts insisted on something radical, the idea that you are a small spectator inside a body, looking out at an external world, is fiction. A pure mental invention. Reality doesn't work that way. You are not separate from what you perceive. The observer and the observed are movements of the same consciousness. There is no real boundary, only a conceptual interpretation of a boundary. And it is inside that interpretation that the ego hides. Non-duality is not abstract philosophy. It is a literal description of how things are. But the ego hates this. Because if there is no separation, who would be the special self? Who would be the seeker? Who would receive enlightenment? Watts knew this was the breaking point. Most people give up here. They prefer to keep the comfortable duality between me and the world, between unenlightened me and awakened me. Because dissolving that line means dissolving the only refuge the ego knows. And very few have the courage to remain without any refuge at all. So what does this change in practice? Everything and nothing. Meditation stops being a tool to produce special states and becomes simply a way of observing the mind. No expectations. No goals. You don't meditate to become a better person. You meditate to see how the mind works. How it creates the sense of me. How it resists. How it seeks. And in this kind of observation, without judgment, something naturally begins to loosen. Goals still exist. But they stop being crutches used to validate your identity. You work, you create, you act, not because you need to prove something about yourself, but because that's what life is doing through you. Consciousness expresses itself. That's all. Spiritual awakening doesn't make you passive. It makes you available. Present. No longer carrying the weight of a story about who you're supposed to be. And, oddly enough, that's where real freedom begins. So here's the question Watts leaves echoing behind. Are you truly seeking spiritual awakening, or are you just dressing up the ego with spiritual language? Because the difference between the two is everything. One sets you free. The other traps you in an even more refined illusion. And the most ironic part? You only realize which one you were doing when you stop doing it. The death of the ego doesn't wait for you to be ready. It happens when you get tired of pretending that there is someone preparing. When you see that consciousness never needed your permission to be what it has always been, whole, complete, without a storyline. The final stage of awakening is not an arrival. It's a letting go. Letting go of the need to be special. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only thing you ever really needed to release. If this content touched something real in you, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Because the next videos go even deeper into this journey. And the question isn't whether you will awaken. It's whether you will stop postponing what is already happening right now.